So good afternoon and thanks for coming. It's almost Earth Day. And I really appreciate everybody coming to our AGM, our special speaker event, Angela Bischoff from the Ontario Clean Air Alliance. We are, for those of you who aren't familiar with the building, there are washrooms downstairs. And there will be refreshments at the end of the Q&A following Angela's presentation. Sorry to any folks on Zoom. We can't offer you tea and cookies. First, I would like to offer a land acknowledgement. Haliburton County is located on the traditional territory of the Mishi, Sagig, and Chippewa nations, collectively known as the Williams Treaties First Nations, and within the territories of the Algonquin Nation. We acknowledge that we all live on lands from which Indigenous peoples were dispossessed by colonialism. Stan Rushworth, an Indigenous elder of Cherokee descent, reminds us of the difference between a Western settler mindset of I have rights and an Indigenous mindset of I have obligations. Instead of thinking that I am born with rights, I choose to think that I am born with obligations to serve past, present, and future generations and the planet herself. So as I mentioned, we are very fortunate to have Angela Bischoff of the Ontario Clean Air Alliance here in person, which is great, to talk to us about Ontario's energy future. Before I introduce Angela, I'd like to mention that anybody on Zoom can type their questions into the chat, but any of you in the room who have questions will just have to remember yours till the end of the presentation. Angela has worked with the environment nonprofit sector for more than 3 decades in 4 Canadian cities on issues such as eco-cities, transportation, climate, mental health, and elections. She is the director of the Ontario Clean Air Alliance, as I said, a small but mighty group aiming to move Ontario onto a 100% renewable path. Now I'd like to welcome Angela to the podium. Just have a timer. So I should go till 2:25 and then Q&A, or do you want me to go shorter, like 2:15 and then Q&A? Okay, even if it bumps it back, if it's 10:22. Okay. Okay. Okay, because I'm gonna move them really quickly. Let me try it. Oh, it's a half. Okay. Okay, and am I standing in a good spot? Hi, everybody, and to all our viewers from at home. Thank you for inviting me and hearing my truth up here from the pulpit, telling my truth. The first and last time I'll ever be invited to speak from the pulpit. So my name is, thank you. No, we're missing a slide. Oh, okay. Yeah, my mistake. Thank you. So I'm going to speak to you about how we can move Ontario to 100% renewable electricity grid. The Ontario Clean Air Alliance is just a bunch of people just like you, environmentalists that came together in '97, were really concerned about air quality in Toronto and in Ontario, and had the solution to phase out coal for electricity generation, because coal was a primary driver of smog in our cities. The doctors came out and said burning of coal is contributing to premature deaths. And the Clean Air Alliance came together, called for 100% coal phase out. It was just a small group of individuals led by Jack Gibbons, who still leads the organization to this day. Everything I'm referring to today comes from research that Jack does. So he's an economist
and an energy analyst. And they won that campaign. I joined them in 2008, but so they started in 97 advocating for 100% coal phase out. And by 2002, they got all the parties on side. So they basically built public support, got NGOs to sign on, and then municipalities to sign on. Then they got the opposition parties all on side, pressuring the governing Conservatives. And the Conservative Party, Ernie Eves at the time in 2002, called for 100% coal phase out. So it took 5 years to get the political parties on side. And then Ernie Eves lost the next election. And Dalton McGuinty, who had campaigned on the coal phase out, won the election in 2002. And the Liberals made the coal phase out happen. They wanted to bump it down the road. It took the Clean Air Alliance to keep putting the pressure on them to stick with their plans. And by 2014, the last lump of coal in Ontario ceased to be burning anymore. So once we won that campaign, and I was hired in 2008 to start building the anti-nuclear campaign, and then we took on an anti-gas campaign. So our overall goal is to move Ontario to 100% renewable electricity grid. And how else do we get where else do we get electricity from is gas and nuclear power. So those are campaigns, and that's what I'm going to speak with you about today, how to phase out and why to phase out gas and nuclear power and how we can move to 100% renewable electricity grid. So Doug Ford's electricity plan. It's hard for me to actually see that, and I need to be referring to those slides. But basically, his electricity plan is to ramp up gas, ramp up nuclear, and yeah, so I'm having, is there any way that I could see that? Thank you. So to build new gas plants, 1,500 megawatts of new gas plants to ramp up the output of our existing gas plants. So many of our gas plants are just peaker plants. So the gas, thank you, amazing. The gas plant in Toronto, the Portland's gas plant, that's a peaker plant. It's only meant to be burned for maybe 100 hours out of the year, maybe 10 to 15% of the time. And last summer it was running 90% of the time. So they're expanding the output of the existing gas plants and actually increasing together with the new gas plants and expanding the output of existing gas plants, increasing the output of the generation of electricity from gas and the greenhouse gas emissions from our electricity sector, because that's primarily the how we produce greenhouse gas emissions in the electricity sector. So 580% from 2017 to 2030. So that's, a 6-fold increase in the midst of climate crisis. So the world is grappling with how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And Doug Ford is ramping up greenhouse gas emissions 560% from 2017 to 2030. So I just think, it just makes no sense, especially when we have alternatives. We have renewable alternatives that we could turn to instead of gas. But Doug Ford's committed to the status quo, the large companies that are producing our gas and nuclear power. Oops. So the nuclear sector in this province, they're basically locking us in, committing us, this province, to spend upwards of $177 billion. They're not telling us how much it's going to cost, but this is how much it's going to cost using, Lazard figures of what the financial community says new nuclear is going to cost. So our 3 major nuclear stations, Bruce, Darlington, and Pickering. Just a quick question. I know if you're looking at the slides, you know the answer, so don't look. How many nuclear reactors do you think we have in the GTA? How many would you guess before you looked at the slide? We have 12. We have a lot, like, I mean, we're probably the most nuclearized, we're definitely the most nuclearized jurisdiction, the GTA in all of North America. In fact, twice as many people live around our nuclear plants in just the Pickering station alone as any other nuclear station in North America. So probably around the world, like usually countries where they have nuclear stations are not in the middle of urban populations. So Fukushima, Chernobyl, those were both, you know, those super tragic accidents, industrial accidents, nuclear accidents. These are both in rural areas. Imagine if we had an accident in the middle of the GTA. So they want to, so there's Toronto and then Pickering and then Darlington. The Darlington nuclear station has 4 old reactors. They're rebuilding all 4 reactors and building 4 new reactors, small modular reactors that have never been built. The Pickering station, which is 30 kilometers from the CN Tower, so from downtown Toronto to the Pickering station, which has 8 reactors. That station came online in 1969. It was designed to last 30 years. It's now 52. And OPG is requesting to run them or some of them till 2026. And they want, now it was supposed to close in 2000. It's like they just keep getting these extensions. And now the Ford government wants to rebuild 4 of the reactors at Pickering. And then the Bruce Nuclear Station, which is what, west of here, is the largest nuclear station in the world. 8 reactors. They're rebuilding all 8 reactors and building 4 more reactors. It's already the biggest in the world. So, like, we are the second most nuclearized jurisdiction in the world, second only to France. We get about 59% of our power from nuclear power. The rest of the world is not going in this direction, or not nearly as reliant on even one electricity source, certainly not nuclear. We're second to France, by the way. So Ford's energy plan is also to invest modestly in energy efficiency and also modestly in renewables. They just announced this year. So after canceling 758 renewable energy projects once they were elected and not investing 1 cent in new renewables since they were elected, they this year announced that they were going to purchase some wind and solar projects, but and it would be a 30% increase from what we currently have. We think that's not nearly enough. And then subsidies. So, you know, the Ford government's budget that they just released last year, or last month, I should say, last month, announced a $9.8 billion deficit. And $7.3 billion of that deficit is electricity subsidies to artificially keep your electricity rates low. Everybody gets it, rich and poor. And it's because they have a very high cost electricity system, but they can't charge you for that because you would be up in arms and you would be opposing their plans to build new gas and nuclear stations, which are twice as expensive as the lower cost, cleaner alternatives. So nobody knows it. Okay, so this shows you so I was mentioning gas, how they've ramped up gas from 2017 to 2030. This is what I'm going to say the IESO a whole bunch of times. That's Independent Electricity System Operator. They are a government agency that buys and sells all the electricity. They manage our electricity system. So it's a government agency. But it's also directed by individuals that, so they're bureaucrats, but they're directed by government. So if Kathleen Wynne was in power, they were building wind and solar. Now they're building gas and nuclear plants. So that's what the government is telling them to do. But you can see that in 2017, only 4% of our electricity came from a greenhouse gas producing fossil fuel. And by 2030, that'll be a quarter of our electricity will come from fossil fuels. Oh, thank you. We got two computers here. Okay, so who benefits? If we know that gas and nuclear are much more expensive than wind, water, solar, conservation, storage, who benefits from that? Well, the existing utilities, the existing players benefit. Enbridge Gas, OPG, Bruce Power, and Cameco. And Cameco is uranium. So, to give you the big picture, what's happening with nuclear power around the world, to give you a sense of how Ontario fits into the larger picture, in the mid-90s, we got 17% of our electricity globally from nuclear power. Because in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, the world went on a nuclear spending spree. And there were about 450 nuclear reactors built around the world. And then in 1986, Chernobyl blew. That was in northern Ukraine. And radioactive fallout went around the globe, especially in Ukraine and Europe. And there are still places in Europe today where you can't eat mushrooms or wild pigs because they eat mushrooms. So that radioactivity got soaked into the soil. So today, though, so after Chernobyl, no one was building nuclear reactors anymore. They started moving in different directions. So that means reactors have shut down over time. And meanwhile, you know, as our electricity has increased, demand has expanded around the world, countries are doing other things, coal, gas, renewables. Today, nuclear power just provides 9% of the world's electricity supply. So it's a big decline in the power that it supplies. Then around 2000, the nuclear industry said, well, we can help solve climate change. So it was after Kyoto in 1997, the world started realizing greenhouse gas emissions. The nuclear industry came in to save the day. So countries started building some nuclear reactors in the early 2000s. And then Fukushima blew in 2011. And again, that was a huge setback. A whole bunch of European countries said no more nuclear and started to turn to different sources. So as a result, the decline from 17% to 9%. The infrastructure is all aging, more reactors are closing than are being opened up, very few are being opened up. And also the large nuclear industries started going bankrupt. So Areva was France, Westinghouse, United States, and Ontario Hydro in the 90s. The nuclear infrastructure that Ontario built and these other countries built just blew a hole in these companies' budgets, and they basically went bankrupt. And also the lower cost renewables started coming onto the picture around 2000. And so the price of renewables has just gone down dramatically. So while nuclear has a net loss of, you know, almost 2 gigawatts in 2023 alone. So it's going down. Renewables grew in 2022, like 50%, like just a massive exponential. Show you a chart of the exponential rise in renewables. So, and when someone says, oh, renewables can't, you know, meet our electricity needs, well, they already are. So the International Energy Agency says by 2028, 42% of all electricity in the world will be generated using wind, water, and solar power. And a quarter of that, so a quarter by 2028 around the world will just be wind and solar. So the world is really caught up on how to produce electricity renewably. This is a chart of, I know it's really hard to see the text, but basically from 2001 at the left of the chart to 2023 at the right end of the chart. This is the sales of solar. And you can see year after year, it's just doubling. It's just an exponential rise. And the chart on the far right is 440 gigawatts. And that is more than the entire global fleet of nuclear power. So in 1 year alone, the world produced that amount of new solar panels. Let me see, global solar installations. So new solar panels in that 1 year produced more power than what's taken the nuclear industry, 6 decades to build. So that's how fast, that's real exponential growth. And also modular development, like the more you're building out in a given year, the price comes down. So what's that called? Economies of scale. The more you build, the more the price comes down. But nuclear, the opposite, they can't build, they're only building a couple a year, and there's no way they can build those out to get economies of scale. So small modular reactors. In comes the nuclear industry, to just like in the last 5 years, to say we can save the day on climate change and on skyrocketing electricity prices. We can produce them modularly. They can be smaller, and we can produce them off site somewhere and transport the parts, just like wind or solar. They're produced in a warehouse somewhere, and then they're transported by truck to the site where they get installed. But in fact, they're not small and they're not modular. So for example, the reactors, the 4 new reactors that they want to build at Darlington, they're of a GE Hitachi. So that's American, Japanese company. They've never been built anywhere in the world. And they're 300 megawatts. And the reactors at Pickering are just over 500 megawatts. So these are huge. And require a huge chunk of land. They're going to build them on an existing site so that they don't have to get an environmental assessment. And they're allowed to, anything over 300 megawatts, they'd have to have an environmental federal assessment, but so they're keeping them at 3, they're capping them at 3. So, but that's not small. And they're not modular, like they're going to be built on site. They might have some parts coming, but they've never been built anywhere in the world. They're just PowerPoint reactors, we call them. They're experimental. So they're not small, they're not modular. And immediately when the industry put this on the table in 2018 with their, I forget what it's called, their nuclear roadmap. They came up with a nuclear roadmap for Canada with the federal government, engaged with them to come up with this roadmap. Immediately, civil society organizations came out and said, no, this is a waste of money and time. They're dangerous. They produce radioactivity. And we have lower cost alternatives. And we called them dirty, dangerous distractions. So why are they dirty and dangerous and distractions? So the IPCC, that's the International Governmental Panel on Climate Change. That is the body of climate scientists from around the world that have been pulled together by the United Nations. There's several thousand climate scientists that annually review research, share their research, come to consensus and release reports every year. And they came to the consensus last year that in order to cap our temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. This was a commitment that was made in Paris, right? In 2015, the COP, the COP gathering of the United Nations in 2019 in Paris. They signed an agreement that we're going to keep temperature increases no higher than 1.5 degrees temperature increase from the 1800s when we started industrial emissions. And they said in order to keep it at 1.5 degrees, we have to cut in half our emissions by 2030, the world community. So they came out with this last year. So meanwhile, it takes nuclear 10 to 15 years, according to the IESO. the independent electricity system operator of the government of Ontario. 10 to 15 years. That's the experience of countries around the world, 10 to 15 years. So they've just begun the process. They don't even have a license to operate. They've never built one. They don't have permissions yet. They just have sort of some site permissions at Darlington. They plan to have they claim they're going to have 4 reactors, ready by if they're actually a climate solution, how are they going to reduce emissions before 2030? I mean, they're not even going to be up and running. But also, while they're building all these reactors and rebuilding all the old reactors and shutting down one at a time to rebuild them, so they're rebuilding Darlington and Pickering and Bruce, they have to shut reactors down. What are they using to back up those reactors that are being shut down? Gas. So the whole gas nuclear plan is a joint plan. And renewables have just been cut out of the picture, except for a little marginal amount. So we're saying it's a distraction. Nuclear is a distraction. If we were really committed to reducing climate emissions, we would ramp up wind and solar immediately and skip any plans to build new experimental reactors, which may come online in 15 years. And in the meantime, we're burning gas. They're untested. They've never been built. There are only 2 SMRs, small modular reactors, anywhere in the world that are at present existing. They're not even feeding into the grid. One is in China and one is in Russia. So 2 centralized governments that just tell industry what they're doing, just fund it. It's not private enterprise. It's national economies that are paying for it. So 2 reactors, they're both different. The ones that they want to build at Darlington, they're different again. So it's just like a new industry. So they're untested, and how could they be considered clean? Like the nuclear industry promotes itself as clean. Doug Ford and all his advertising, clean, low cost nuclear energy. It's just a ruse. So the industry itself says nuclear waste has to be isolated from the environment for 1 million years. And they've been telling us since the 40s when they started producing nuclear waste through the fission process, which initially started in the 40s in Canada to produce plutonium for the weapons, for bombs in the United States. That's how nuclear power got its start. The fission process created plutonium. Now the fission process still creates plutonium. In fact, there's as much plutonium in all the nuclear waste at the Pickering site alone as all the nuclear weapons, all the warheads in the world. There's as much plutonium in the waste at Pickering as all the warheads in the world. You'd have to extract it, and the industry wants to extract it, and they actually have a proposal to extract plutonium from the waste in New Brunswick so that they can then feed it back into reactors and create this endless loop of taking the plutonium out of the waste, putting it back into reactors. But someone else could grab that plutonium and create a bomb. And that's what we fear the nuclear industry in Canada has every intention of doing. They want to sell SMRs overseas, get all these Eastern European countries, get all the countries in the world to have their own nuclear reactors, which is what Canada did in the 70s when we gave a CANDU nuclear reactor to India. What did they do? They created the bomb. And then Pakistan had to get into the game. And why are we pushing Iran to not enrich their own uranium or extract plutonium? In this case, enrich uranium. We don't want them to create an atomic bomb, so we say they can't do that. Meanwhile, we're prepared to open up the plutonium economy in Canada with no government, with no parliamentary conversation. You and I haven't even had any conversation about that. The parliament hasn't discussed opening up the plutonium economy. Trudeau Sr. shut it down in the 70s because it's messy, it's dirty, it's dangerous. In the States, they weren't doing it either. The most toxic places in the world is where they extract plutonium. for the weapons manufacturing. Now Canada is opening the door to that. So nothing clean about nuclear waste that has to be isolated from the environment for a million years. We have no solution what to do with it. The industry wants to bury it in a hole in Teeswater, just west of here, cover it up, abandon it forever for a million years. And the community is having a referendum on that in the fall. They need to organize and get their people out to that referendum, because if they don't get 50% out and they don't have 50% of those voters to oppose them being the nuclear waste repository for all of Canada's nuclear waste, which will truck 2 trucks a day for 50 years through these communities up to Teeswater to dump the waste into a 600-meter hole. Like, this is the best the industry can give us. So not clean, there's accidents, Fukushima, Chernobyl, these are huge dead zones where nobody will ever live forever, radioactive dead zones. I already mentioned plutonium, expensive. This is expensive. I'll show you our cost chart later in the presentation. It's like, if they were really a fraction of the cost of anything else, maybe it would make sense. Somehow we could justify it, but they're the most expensive electricity option we have. So why? Why? Okay. So I mentioned there's only 2 SMRs in the world, one in China and one in China and one in Russia. And there was I think 6, maybe only, I don't know, 6 were in the process of being built. Like one project, the NuScale project, it was I think in Idaho. Yeah, Idaho. It's the only project that was licensed to begin construction in the United States for an SMR. Again, it was a different kind than the GE Hitachi. It was a different kind altogether. And they had already blown $4 billion of US taxpayers' funds. Because the private market is not putting money into these things. A little bit, but it's all subsidized by government. So they'd already blown $4 billion, and it was already like ballooning way out of budget. Like, they always lie. They say it's only going to cost this, and it ends up costing way more. Even in Ontario, every nuclear project in Ontario's history has gone on average 2.5 times over budget. So they say it's going to cost $3 billion, and it ends up costing what, $8 billion. So customers bailed and the project folded. So now there's no licensed project under development in the United States. And there's one in Canada, the GE Hitachi at Darlington, that is in the process of being developed. No licensed construction or anything yet. No designs approved. So interestingly, so that one bailed because they were private investors and municipalities were buying into it and putting money into it. They have a different system. Here we just have OPG, a monopoly. And so they get to spend whatever they want. They don't even have to tell us how much it's going to cost. Like, they haven't told us how much these SMRs are going to cost. We're using estimates based on evidence of other reactors, what the financial institutions like Lazard say they're going to cost. But OPG hasn't told us. So they're just moving forward with building these experimental, and the environmental assessment was done like 15 years ago for a different reactor that they wanted to build other reactors there 15 years ago. And now that they don't even have to do an updated environmental assessment for these new reactors that haven't even been chosen. Like, it's just the most insane. It just goes on and on. Because you and I are expected to foot the bill. We're all footing it. So, government funding. The feds have bought into this whole thing, and probably because the feds bought into it in the 50s and the 40s. We were part of the nuclear club. We have uranium. We up in Chalk River, which is just right outside, just upstream of Ottawa, along the Ottawa River, feeds into the Ottawa River. That was the hub. It still is the hub of nuclear research. for the development of the atomic bomb to produce plutonium for the Manhattan Project in the United States. So the US, Britain, and Canada conspired to build the atomic bomb, and Canada had the uranium and produced the plutonium and sent it to the United States for their bomb and program. And they did that until the late 60s. We sent plutonium to the American war effort till the late 60s, at which point we stopped. And we have since signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which says that we can't be part of these nuclear weapons programs. So that's a good thing, but there's still lots of questions around that. But we're not sending plutonium anymore, that we know. But Canada has always had at Chalk River and then the CANDU nuclear reactors, which we have all of Canada's reactors are CANDU reactors. There's one in New Brunswick on the Bay of Fundy. There was two in Quebec, they both shut down. And then the Ontario reactors. And then there's research reactors. There's a few in Chalk River, Ralston, it's a community in Manitoba, just near the border. Anybody know? Forget what that's called. It's shut down. Pardon?
White sand.
White sand? Is that it? White sand? Something like that. Maybe you're right. So super toxic nuclear sites. And we're trying to figure out, the industry wants to just fill it all in and keep it on site. But we don't support that, but we also don't support shipping all the high level nuclear fuel waste to the big deep geologic repository, which they're choosing right now, two sites. One is Teeswater in South Bruce. But anyways, the feds have always been in the game, and now they're sucked into this game because they want to revive the Chalk River site, because all the reactors, the research reactors there that were producing isotopes and various things, they're not using them anymore. So now they want Chalk River to be this research facility where all the nuclear companies that want to build small modular reactors, they want to do their research, they want to have like research facilities, like the same company that wants to have, extract the plutonium in New Brunswick, they want to have a research facility in Chalk River. And so the New Brunswick reactor is their partner in this research. And all the company, there's a different company that wants to build one in Alberta, a different company that wants to, or no, Saskatchewan wants the same company that we have in Ontario, but there's like a dozen companies, all foreign, all have ties to nuclear weapons that want to set up research laboratories in Chalk River. And the federal government is fully in line with this. And in fact, this just in the last, I think maybe the last year, maybe it's 2 years, this is all the money that's gone to all the various companies from the United States, from the UK, and the various projects that are being proposed. And most recently, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank gave $1 billion low interest loan to OPG for their SMRs that they want to build. We were curious, like, is it no interest? Is it really low? We did a freedom of information request. They wouldn't tell us. How low interest was that loan? Is it $3? So they're already putting millions of dollars, I think, and they give a billion, 1.5 billion per year to AACL, and that's at Chalk River. That's Atomic Energy Control Limited, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited. So that's, you know, the Canadian federal research nuclear body. They give them $1 billion, $1.5 billion every year in Chalk River, and there's much more. So I've already mentioned that we really don't know what to do with the waste, and the best thing the industry can come up with is dumping it in a deep 600-meter hole below the surface of the earth. They started out with 26 potential sites in Canada. And they're now down to 2. One is Teeswater in South Bruce, and the other is northwest of Ignace, so northwest of Thunder Bay. First Nations lands, people there don't want it. The Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which is the industry body that's tasked with finding a solution to the nuclear waste. They're throwing millions of dollars. They have so much money. They have got dozens of staff in each of those communities, full-time staff, PR, advertising, giving money to the local municipalities, buying them community centers and everything that, you know, the area, Kincardine, you know, all those communities, they get so much money from the nuclear industry, so they're bought into it. But those 2 communities now are sort of vying to be the deep geologic repository for all of Canada's nuclear fuel waste. First Nations have a veto over this. If the First Nations in either of those communities say no, then we're back to the drawing board. And the Teeswater is having a referendum. I think the Ignace area is also having a referendum in the fall, and they have different parameters around that. Anyways, it seems obscene to me, this industry. So we get some electricity for a couple of decades, and we leave our waste for 1 million years for future generations to deal with. I want to add that at present in the world, there are no DGRs or deep geologic repositories hosting high-level nuclear fuel waste. Everywhere in the world, they're dealing with the same problem. What are they going to do with the high-level nuclear fuel waste? And at present, all the nuclear fuel waste in Canada is all on site. And every country has something different. Some people have interim places, but they're all temporary. And some countries in Europe, they're coming up with plans to build DGRs, deep geologic repositories. And Canada also wants to build them, but none have been licensed to date. And there are 3 DGRs that are hosting nuclear waste, but not high level. So there's a difference. The nuclear fuel waste is the high level, and that's what this DGR is about. There are 3 currently around 2 in Germany and 1 in New Mexico that host low or intermediate level nuclear waste. And all 3 have failed. And nuclear waste has leaked. And one of them, so bad in, I'll say Germany, that they have to open up the hole because it's deep and it's covered and buried with concrete, and the hole is stuffed with concrete. They're opening it up at the cost of billions of dollars to pull all the nuclear fuel waste out because it's leaking into the groundwater. We don't know how to contain this material, which is going to stay hot for 1 million years. So meanwhile, the world is going renewable. So the International Energy Agency forecasts that in the next 5 years, 80% of new supply is coming from renewables. So the world is going on a renewable path. There's still some coal, there's still some gas and still some oil, but fewer and fewer countries are exploring or building new projects. The new projects are coming from renewables. Oh, okay, this is not going to work on that big, oops. You see that chart? This is too, it's too difficult. I'm not going to go there. Let's go to I'm not going to, can you? Yeah, a couple to that one. Because those slides don't work on that screen at all. So what do we propose? The Ontario Clean Air Alliance proposes some different things. And this is the cost chart. This is how much our electricity options cost. At the far left, you have energy efficiency, 1 point, so all these figures, I just want to say, we're not pulling these out of the hat. They are either IESO numbers or they are Lazard. So where the IESO, yeah, so Lazard is American, most world-renowned financial institution. And they say how much these things are going to cost, so companies and governments can understand what they should be investing in. So at the far left on the green is 1.6 cents. We have so much opportunity to exploit so much more conservation that we haven't even scratched the surface. And when Doug Ford was elected, he cut the energy conservation budget by 60%. And so now I showed you in that earlier slide, they're committed to spending $250 million a year on conservation. Excellent, but we need to exploit that. In fact, we should be spending as much on conservation as we are on the new supply options, say on new nuclear. Let's spend it all on conservation, reduce our demand. Instead, change all the light bulbs, change, industrial, like retrofitting buildings, instead of pumping, instead of creating new supply, we're reducing demand. And then the Quebec water power is 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So that's how much their average export is. That's how much they're selling their power to the United States, to other provinces, to Ontario a little bit. On average, 5 cents. But we should be contracting with Quebec to import much more water power and storage from Quebec. They have a massive surplus, and we should be taking advantage of that. We've already got the transmission lines between the provinces. I can speak more about that, but I'll leave that for now. Then solar power plus storage is the yellow bar, 10 cents. That's what, if we were to buy solar power now, keep in mind, the conservatives will always say, oh, wind and solar, that's why our electricity rates are so high, wind and solar. And there's some truth to that, because when Kathleen Wynne implemented the feed-in tariff programs where we guaranteed prices for industry to set up shop in Ontario and set up wind farms and solar farms, we incentivized them to come to the province. We gave them higher rates. But the whole idea of that feed-in tariff program, or the Green Energy and Economy Act, was that each year the price would come down. And that's what happened. The price kept coming down. But the conservatives today will still quote, oh, we paid, that's because Kathleen Wynne paid 80 cents a kilowatt hour for solar. But the fact is, today, when solar plus storage, 10 cents a kilowatt hour, onshore wind plus storage, so whether it's batteries or whatever, 10.5 cents a kilowatt hour. The two orange bars at 10 cents and 13 cents, that's what we're paying for nuclear. And the first one is what we're paying OPG in 2024. Keep in mind, there's lots of subsidies worked into that. And OPG, they're rebuilding Darlington. They say they have to increase rates to 13%. Just to pay for the Darlington rebuild. Well, why don't we build solar or wind instead of rebuilding Darlington and increasing rates? 14 cents is offshore wind. So we want to lift the offshore wind moratorium, which Dalton McGuinty implemented a decade ago. We want to lift that moratorium and put wind turbines in the Great Lakes. There's been studies done that we would only need 300 wind turbines in all the Great Lakes surrounding Ontario. 300 wind turbines, that's not very much when you realize that a lot of wind farms, even in Ontario, are that many. So just dotted, and they'd be 10 kilometers off the shoreline, 10 or more kilometers, you wouldn't even see them. And then 22, the gray bar, is new gas plants. And that's what Doug Ford is contracting for, 1,500 megawatts of new gas plants. How expensive is that? Dirty, polluting, emission generating. And then new nuclear projects. That's for the SMRs, or even the rebuilds. Just new nuclear, that's how much that costs. Even the Royal Bank, and this is the Canadian bank that funds more fossil fuel projects than any other bank in Canada. Yeah. Even they did a study and said we could completely avoid building new gas plants in Ontario just by investing in energy efficiency. And we could still save $500 million a year. Like, these guys are not radical. They even came up with studies that we like. Quebec has massive surplus. I mentioned that. We've got the grid between the two provinces. The IESO has identified where we could expand transmission lines along existing corridors, transmission corridors. It wouldn't be like taking down trees and forests, etc. And they peak in the winter and we peak in the summer. So when they have surplus power in the summer that they aren't using, we can be importing them to meet our peak hour needs, which is what the peaker plants are built for, primarily in the summer when our air conditioners are going full out. So there's good synergy between Quebec and Ontario. Also, they're massive hydro reservoirs. I'm going to come back to that one in another. Okay. Oh yeah, this is it. So there have been studies done, most notably the MIT, really credible institution, Massachusetts Institute for Technology. They've done a study saying that Quebec's massive hydro reservoirs. Now, I should just say we're not supporting building new hydro dams. We don't support large hydro dams, but they're already there. They were built in the 90s. The First Nations have a good agreement with Hydro-Quebec. They benefit from more sales. They support more sales, but their hydro reservoirs can act as a storage battery for variable wind and solar in Ontario. So when our wind or solar is below average, they can give us more power. When our wind and solar is above average, we send our power to them. So again, it's a good collaboration. I mentioned Great Lakes wind power. This is a study that was done, 64 sites. This was done like a decade ago, and there's since been more there, but we're calling for a rescinding of the moratorium of offshore wind power. And we'd like to, and the offshore wind turbines are much more efficient and could be much larger. And then one more storage option is our EVs. By 2030, there's going to be so many more EVs that the storage in their batteries would be double the capacity of our gas plants. So we could phase out our gas plants by 2050 just through implementing bidirectional batteries with our charging systems and allowing you with your EV battery, your EV car, to plug in at night when our demand for electricity is low and we have lots of surplus power and rates are cheap. That's when you plug in your car, and you take from the grid. And then during the day when you're at the office or when Ontario is peaking and using all the electricity, instead of firing up our gas plants, we plug our cars back into the grid and you feed your electricity, your energy from your battery back into the grid. And in that way, it's a storage. So all those batteries are storage opportunities. At present, you can't feed. We have the technological know-how, like some of the vehicles, EV vehicles that you're buying today have the opportunity to charge your house, for example, so you can feed back into your house. But we don't have the policies in place for you to get paid for that yet. And we need those policies. Just like you can feed your solar panel back into the grid, you can't feed your EV battery back into the grid. So that's another untapped source. And we have to move quickly. We can't wait for Doug Ford to, like, why don't we have these policies for bidirectional batteries already? Make it more profitable for you as an EV owner. You earn income from selling back into the grid, just like a solar power person can earn income. We need to move quickly because the IPCC says we need to limit our emissions in half by 2030. What are we waiting for? Why are we building nuclear plants and gas plants? Like, in the middle of a climate crisis, what is Doug Ford thinking? At the last climate summit in Dubai in December, the global community committed in the final document, which was called the Global Stocktake, to triple wind and solar power, to triple renewables. So that's basically wind, solar, water. So the world, but nobody's building new dams, new big dams, but there's lots of opportunity to generate more electricity with smaller dams or run of the river hydropower. But the world committed to tripling renewables by 2030. 22 countries also agreed to triple nuclear, including Canada. But it's impossible to triple nuclear because it takes 15 years to build out. And even then, you're only going to build a couple of reactors, and there's no way we can do that. But anyways, there's promise that the world is tripling renewables. And I showed you the chart of the exponential growth. I showed you the chart for solar, but by the way, it's the same thing with wind. It's an exponential chart around the world. So we're calling, and I left leaflets at the back, and I invite you to each take 10 and give them to your neighbors or leave them in local coffee shops. We're calling for Ontario to triple wind and solar by 2035. We picked 2035 because the federal government is committed to a zero carbon electricity grid by 2035. Now, Ontario, of course, is asking for all these loopholes, and they want to burn gas until 2050. They don't want to be they don't want to be capped till 2035 and then slowly, instead of phasing it out by 2035, which is the intention of the federal government, net zero electricity grid by 2035. Doug Ford's government is going to ramp it up 580% by 2035 and then slowly year by year reduce it. So we're saying no, triple wind and solar, that's how we phase out gas. And, no more expenditures. The Green Party of Ontario, Mike Schreiner, he agrees, no more expenditures on nuclear projects. We're not saying shut them down tomorrow. We're saying when they come to the end of their lives, shut them down, replace them with wind and solar, storage, etc., energy efficiency. And Stanford U, a team at Stanford U, you've probably heard of Mark Jacobson. Their team has done studies of a whole, 50 different countries, how they could go 100% renewable by 2050 for all purposes, transportation, heating, electricity. And this is too hard for you to see. I'm sorry. This is too hard. But basically, they modeled how Canada could do it. And they said solar would be 20%. Wind, onshore wind would be 37%. Offshore wind would be 21%. And, just some, and hydroelectric 16%. So lots of people are coming up with research on how we're going to do this. The David Suzuki Foundation did the same thing here in Canada. How could Canada go 100% renewable by 2050 for transportation, everything? And similarly, they came up with, the bulk of it to come from wind, that big green thing in the middle, that would be wind. The yellow is solar. Hydro is at the top, and the bottom blue strip is hydro. So water, wind, solar, and the top one is storage. So they spend a lot of time, like many people, coming up with how to do that. And then we have just released a week ago our most recent report, which condenses everything that I'm saying, how Ontario could go 100% renewable, phase out our gas plants, replace nuclear. Well, actually, this just talks about replacing our gas plants, but also replacing instead of new nuclear projects, the new SMRs at least. So it analyzes what Ontario's Doug Ford's direction, which is the wrong direction, and then really gets into detail what I've been describing today. So we say no to gas and nuclear, yes to renewables and conservation. And that leaflet at the back, if you sign the back of the leaflet, it sends you to send a letter. It asks you to send a letter to Doug Ford. When you send that letter, I will then add you to my database. And once a week or once every 2 weeks, many of you are probably already on it. You'll get an update of the work we're doing. So this is the work we're doing. If you're interested in that, send your letter to Doug Ford, let him know what you think. We have to, that's the most important thing. We do live in a democracy as far as last I heard. It's not the best, but the government of the day should be accountable, and we have to let them know. We hear from politicians, we meet politicians all the time, and they tell us that they don't hear about these issues at the door. They don't, they hear about affordability or jobs or economic, that's what they're hearing from people at the door. They're not hearing about concerns about climate change or gas burning or nuclear power. So they need to hear from us. We need to make our voices known. And the goal of our organization is to empower individuals to engage in the political process at some level. Writing a letter to your local, like whenever you send a letter to the MPP using our letter tools, it also goes to your local MPP. And so, your local MPP needs to know what you think about these issues. So we're helping you engage in those. I know there's a million other issues we're all involved in, but this is our agenda, and I hope that you can join us in this agenda. Thank you. I know I'm much longer than expected, but we have a little bit of time maybe for questions.
Thank you very much, Angela. I'd like to introduce Terry Moore, our Vice President, to come and moderate the question and answer period. Thanks, Terry.
Well, that's a lot to unpack. We do have, how much time do we have, Susan? Okay, so any questions that anybody wants to pose, we'll go first to the people that are here. We'll see if anybody on Zoom wants to have a question in chat as well. But anybody have a question, want to follow up with anything that Angela said? Yes, no.
And why that was released, and if those concerns would apply also to the because I can see people concerned about fish and birds and wildlife, etc. Of course, disregarding all of those impacts from
And I'll repeat the question. How's that? It's fine. I'll stand on my tiptoes. Okay. So the question was, what about the wind moratorium? How would that affect the lakes? And how did it come into being? And just to confirm, it's a wind moratorium on offshore turbines. There's no wind moratorium on onshore. So I'm going to say 2011, Scarborough in the GTA Toronto Hydro wanted to put a wind farm off the Scarborough Bluffs. And there's massive opposition to doing that. So much opposition, it became so toxic a political issue that Dalton McGuinty put a moratorium on offshore wind turbines so we wouldn't have to deal with that. So in all of the Great Lakes feeding into Ontario. So that we're saying, let's lift that. And we have, there is some opposition from nature groups, but from what we're aware, including the ones that we reached out to, in our report, we have a report on the offshore potential for Ontario. And I think it was the Audubon Society, like we reached out to different bird groups and large nature groups, and they are supportive of it. But it would have to, each project that was proposed would still have to undergo an environmental assessment and make sure, like there's ways to modify the projects to account for, bird migration, or you have to turn them off at certain seasons during migration. But the experience globally is that they're much less disruptive than might be portrayed, and also the nature groups like the Audubon Society, etc., are very aware that climate change is really is already affecting birds and animal habitat. And so, it's kind of the lesser of two evils, like everything, solar panels, wind turbines, they all have an impact, but we believe they're much more benign than the alternatives, which are gas, oil, and nuclear. And so we need to ameliorate or modify our behaviors so that we can recycle the materials. And I was at a presentation yesterday that someone in Huntsville, that Stephen Lapp, he's a professor, he gave. And he said that someone asked about the problems with electric vehicle batteries. They were using, lithium and various precious metals. And he talked about how they're now recycling and improving, and that the amount of mining waste and land required to produce batteries for electric vehicles is 1/1000th of the amount of land and waste to produce combustion engines over the lifetime.
Yes, Randy.
So we share the Great Lakes with the United States. Do they have offshore wind? And will they want us not to, or that? That's one. And the other is, we just saw what happened to a bridge in the States when the boat ran into it. When a boat runs into one of these things, what's going to happen?
That's a good question. Okay, so two questions. One, do they have offshore wind turbines in the Great Lakes in the United States? And two, how vulnerable are they to boat crashes? So in the States, they are now, I think they have about 13 large projects approved or in the process of being built on the East Coast. So that's where they're really beginning their offshore wind. Around Europe, there's lots of offshore wind. North America is just beginning. There was a project that was approved in Lake Erie on the US side, and it got stalled for some reason. I don't know if they had already begun the process, but we were initially citing it as United States is getting in the game. We got to get into the game. But it got stalled, so I'm not using it anymore, but they are in the process of wanting to do it, getting regulatory approval, etc. The Great Lakes are, I don't know, there's a border that goes between them, so they don't have any say, from what I understand, if Canada wants to do them. But yeah, I'm sure we'll be working those things out, but they're starting the process, and we're saying we should start the process as well. And the ones that were proposed for Lake Erie, they were also more than 10 kilometers offshore, and they're still and that's what we're saying. They should be minimum 10 kilometers offshore. And, the lakes are much wider than that and could accommodate that. So yeah, let's just get the ball rolling. Oh, and then in terms of how damaging would a crash be? Well, they all, they're relatively independent, but they all have just a cable. It might harm the boat, but it's not going to be a catastrophic accident. I don't know. I haven't heard of that happening. There being boat crashes with offshore turbines anywhere in Europe. I've never heard of it. Oh,
It's bridge.
yeah.
That's something that's sitting out in the middle of the lake from an iceberg.
Yeah, but we don't have icebergs. Do we have? I don't think we have icebergs in the Great Lakes, but we do have boats, and surely they would have to take some responsibility there. But yeah, good point. Just don't think it would be that catastrophic that many people would be impacted. Oil. Yeah, like an oil rig. went on fire or leaked.
Yes,
Small question, what's the renewable, part of the moving parts of the wind turbine? How often do you have to replace the parts or how often do you break down? And the solar cells, are they recyclable?
Are solar cells and wind turbines recyclable, and how often do they need, like they have, and how often do they need to be replaced? They do have shelf lives like of 20 years, or I'm not sure, each one is going to be different. For the most part, the industry is figuring out how to recycle things. They're, they're private industry, so they're incentivized to, as they're growing. But I can't respond. I don't know. It's worked into the price though. And,
just on that, I know that recently there's been a lot of work done because up until recently, the blades of large wind turbines were not recyclable. And they were actually bearing. And then that became a really serious problem for some environmental organizations, and there was a lot of pressure. Now now there is a new way of taking them apart. First off, they're built so they can be taken apart. And that was the piece that was missing. And so now they're being built with the idea of being recycled, and the parts that go into them are then go back into a kind of a circular economy kind of model, as opposed to having to be buried. Same with solar panels. I mean, the same sort of thing is now happening with more pressure saying, wait a second, we just can't waste this stuff. This has got to be part of a circular economy, not a linear take, make and waste economy. So that's one point that we're going to have to call this to a close pretty quickly. But if anybody else has one last question, that'd be great. But I wanted to make one point, because it just deja vu all over again for me, was that when you talk about conservation, I remember back, I used to work in the Legislative Assembly in a different life. And I remember where Brian Charlton was the critic for energy for the Democratic Party. At one point he suggested, and he asked NDP Research, which I was part of, how much could we save if we really put our mind to it? And what would that mean in terms of our build out for nuclear, for example? And we found out that if we gave a new refrigerator and a new stove, the most efficient that was available at the time, to every family in Ontario, we would not have to build Darlington. We would not have to build Darlington. The huge amount of savings that we can get from conservation, from being able to just reduce by using the most efficient electrical devices possible, is immense. And I don't think we really understand just how incredible that can really be in terms of reducing the actual demand that we're going to have to build, renewable or otherwise. So any final question?
We do have a question online
Oh, great.
for Angela from Janice Wilton. Janice is wondering, Angela, can you talk about the droughts around the world and how lucky we are in Ontario to be on 4 of the Great Lakes, the 5th of which holds 21% of the world's surface fresh water, or all 5 of them. Why would we risk nuclear accidents on the source of drinking water for millions? And this energy issue is definitely about affordability. In the States, the Government Accountability Department has concerns about the damaging impacts on nuclear from the impacts of climate change. Would that be the same here?
okay, so yes, all of Ontario's nuclear reactors reside on our Great Lakes. Our larger nuclear reactors, at least. And they require a lot of water. Thanks for the question, by the way, John. They require a lot of water, and all of Canada's, in the States where you see the reactor that is shaped like this, goes up and it's flat at the top, that's a cooling tower. And that means all that nuclear fission will everything, it's creating heat, and they just circulate water around to cool it. Well, in Canada, the nuclear industry advocated not to have to build those cooling towers because A, they were expensive, and B, they would look ugly and people would see them and know that there was a nuclear reactor there. So instead, they got was called once through cooling, where they suck the water out of the lake, like millions of gallons a day, they suck it through, and all the fish and fish eggs and everything get caught in these nets. They suck the water through, and then they cool the fuel waste and they send it back out into the lake. And so the lake around all our reactors is warm, and it doesn't freeze all year round, and that's where water skiers and stuff go, and wind kiters go, because it doesn't freeze and it's warm. You can believe it. Anyways, and we're releasing tritium, so radioactive water, into the air and water, and such that the Lake Ontario, which has lots of nuclear facilities on it, not just Darlington and Pickering, but some on the other side of the lake in the States. The levels of radioactive tritium in the water, which is a carcinogen, mutagen, and teratogen, which crosses the placental barriers, mutates genes, causes cancer. The levels of tritium in Lake Ontario are twice the levels of tritium in Lake Superior, which has no nuclear facilities on it. So that's where we get our drinking water. That's where millions of people get their drinking water, from the Great Lakes. So we're dumping radioactive tritium into the water. And if there was ever a nuclear accident, it would impact drinking water of millions of people. So why would we do that? Again, why would we risk that when we could have wind and solar on and offshore, and conservation efficiency to reduce demand? It's just crazy making.
So Susan?
Thanks, Terry. So thank you very much, Angela. That was a terrific presentation. And we appreciate your passion and your knowledge, and for coming all the way down here from Huntsville to be with us today. And I'd like to give you a little token of our appreciation made in Hudson Creek in Haliburton County. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
So this is when we get to have our tea and cookies and coffee. So they are at the back and they are ready for you. So help yourselves. And so in about 15 minutes, hopefully we'll be back to enjoy the business meeting. So thanks. I hope you all enjoyed Angela's presentation. She's certainly passionate about her topic and very knowledgeable. So the first order of business is about the Robert's Rules of Order. So I need someone to move that we adopt Robert's Rules of Order for our business meeting. Could I have a mover, please? Okay, Tammy, and a seconder, Terry. Thank you. All in favor? Okay, no one opposed. That's carried. Thank you very much. This is the agenda. Can you see that on the screen there? We've already gone through the first few items on the agenda, but can I have someone move that we adopt the agenda as shown? Keith, thank you. And a seconder? Wilma, thank you. All in favor? Okay, nobody opposed? No. Okay, great, thank you very much. Next thing we have to approve the minutes of the November 24th, 2022 AGM that were circulated previously. I'm hoping that you've all had a chance to look at them and that you didn't see any errors or omissions. And I don't see anyone speaking up, so I would like someone to move that we adopt the minutes of the 2022 AGM. Terry, and a seconder. Tammy, thank you very much. And all in favor? Nobody opposed, that carries. Thank you very much. So now I'm going to give the director's report. So our AGM 2022 featured Leora Berman, who spoke about the importance of wetlands and how other municipalities are working to balance conservation and development. Since our last AGM, our board members have been myself, Terry Moore, Vice President, Margaret Dubransky, Treasurer and Membership, Christine Legg, Secretary, Tanny Cooper, Ryan Sisson, sorry, Kitler, and Ryan Sisson and Wilma Thompson, all directors. Keith Hay, my husband, and an Environment Haliburton member, has been keeping our financial records in order. Thanks to the hard work of this dedicated executive, Environment Haliburton has been able to continue to teach, or at least attempt to, and persuade others to protect our environment over the past year. Among the hot topics of the beginning of 2023 were Grass Lake and Dysart, and the proposed rezoning of lands owned by a local developer for an 88-unit condo, and Premier Ford's Bill 23 and its effect on wetlands and other natural areas. We wrote letters to MPP Laurie Scott and others on the Bill 23 issue, and a letter to Stephen Stone, our county planner, regarding the rezoning issue. Our first big project was writing a proposal for a local initiatives proposal grant to redo our website. Unfortunately, our proposal was rejected. The long debated shoreline preservation bylaw was finally adopted by 3 of the 4 townships, but declined by Dysart, who have designed their own version. We designed a bookmark to be distributed around the county to let people know who we are and how we can protect our planet. We transferred our membership and donations arrangements from Square to Zephy, thanks to Ryan Sisson, a platform that has been adopted by many not-for-profit organizations. And we arranged with the post office to have a corporate address, which is box 612, in case you needed to know. Our February enviro-cafe topic was about bird collisions with windows and how they can be minimized. Our speaker was Michael Measure, Executive Director of the Fatal Light Awareness Program. In March, we had a virtual presentation by Alison Hansen of Rodenticide Free Ontario about the dangers of rat and mouse poisons when they enter the ecosystem. Many predators such as owls and foxes die from eating mice that have consumed poisons and escaped to the outdoors. We celebrated Earth Day 2022 by having Gord Jones from Minden, who is a retired HVAC technician, talk about heat pumps at an in-person event at Haliburton United Church. This generated a lot of interest from the community, who asked us to help with education about technology and government incentives. This interest was the stimulus for the creation of our electrification group, which has grown by leaps and bounds. And we have met many times, and it's a great group. So please check out our page on the Environment Haliburton website. In May, myself, President, made a delegation to County Council about the hazards of fireworks. In dry conditions, fireworks can cause fires. They're also detrimental to wildlife, companion animals, and also can cause stress in people. In May, Keith and Susan Hay, myself and my husband, took a display of Environment Haliburton materials to the Coalition of Haliburton Property Owners Association Lake Stewards event at Sir Sam's Ski and Ride. Our May enviro-cafe was sponsored by Seniors for Climate Action Now and Climate Action Muskoka. It featured Jamie Neen from Mining Watch Canada, who spoke on the devastating impacts of mineral extraction. Our June enviro-cafe featured Dr. Michael Polanyi from Nature Canada, who spoke about the impact of industrial logging on the climate and biodiversity. The way the logging industry manages its operations is part of the reason we have had so many wildfires over the past years, climate change being another significant factor. Speaking of wildfires, as you know, they raged across Canada for the better part of last spring and summer, causing heavy smoke drifting down as far as New York City and even impacting Haliburton some days. The Dorset and Bancroft air quality indexes available on the internet kept us informed of air quality, which was often quite poor, even if not detected visually or by odor. During the summer, Environment Haliburton made 2 farmers market appearances, one at Abbey Gardens in July and one in Haliburton in August. Unfortunately, despite our best efforts, we were not able to find the summer speaker. Our enviro-cafe in October, co-sponsored by Friends of the Muskoka Watershed, featured Dr. Norman Yan. Dr. Yan spoke about hazardous algal blooms or blooms of blue-green algae that can be toxic. These blooms are increasing in incidence and severity in our county and beyond. Dr. Yan spoke about what we can do to minimize them, such as naturalized shorelines, proper maintenance of septic systems, and reducing the amount of road salt, which is often overused. If you didn't attend this event and you're curious to know more, you can find the recording on our website. In fact, almost all of our virtual events were recorded and can be found on our website. In September, we had our first electrification group meeting at my house and my husband's house. And Keith toured the group around the various electrification projects that we have done around our home to transition off fossil fuels. Since then, our group has grown to 12 members, some of whom have in-depth knowledge of electricity, heat pumps, solar panels, batteries, and electric vehicles. We have populated a page on our website with lots of great information about grants that are available, heat pumps, how they function, and other matters. Our aim is to assist others in our community to transition off fossil fuels. We are attending repair cafes at Search in Haliburton with a display, hoping to educate our community about opportunities that exist to transition off fossil fuels. I want to mention, in case that you're not aware, that there are cold climate air source heat pumps that can produce heat down to -25. Many people are not aware of that. In November, our enviro-cafe featured Dr. Franz Hartman from the Alliance for Livable Ontario, who spoke about how the affordable housing crisis can be addressed while protecting farmland and essential green space. Our first event of 2024 was a joint venture between Environment Haliburton and Seniors for Climate Action Now, featuring Dr. Rick Hill, an Indigenous elder, historian, and educator from Mohawk College. Dr. Hill examined the underlying values of landholding, gratitude for what nature provides, and the necessity of halting the disregard for the sacred earth. Our February enviro-cafe featured a virtual presentation by 3 speakers from Shift, a Canadian organization that researches, investigates, and publicizes how pension funds in Canada, including the Canada Pension Plan, invest in fossil fuels, which not only worsen the climate crisis, but may well become stranded assets, which means assets that are worthless. Our March enviro-cafe featured Avalash Contamini from Efficiency Canada. He talked about energy poverty and the housing crisis and touched on the connections these topics have with climate change. Our most exciting venture, in my opinion, of 2023-24 has been our electrification group, who have met monthly at our homes, learning about heat pumps, water heaters, solar panels, and government incentives. Pictured here are some examples of electrification of transportation, the heating of water, and an array of solar panels that we visited. On April the 4th, we collaborated with Climate Action Muskoka on a webinar that helped to explain solar panels, how they work, how they are installed, and how the energy that they produce can be monitored. I'm showing this pie graph with the thin red slice of the pie representing Canada's contribution to global greenhouse gases because it often comes up in conversation with people who are confused about the difference between Canada's global greenhouse gas contribution and our per capita contribution of greenhouse gases. The red slice on this graph seems negligible until you realize that global contribution and per capita contribution of greenhouse gases are very different things. On this graph, Canada's per capita greenhouse gas emissions are shown third from the right, third after Australia and the USA. In summary, Environment Haliburton has had a very busy year and a half attempting to fulfill our mission statement to promote environmental and social health through advocacy and education. As most of you know, climate change or global warming has not slowed, and the oil and gas industry show no signs of abatement. The weather, as you've noticed, is getting weirder. I've read that the best thing that you can do to reduce your anxiety about climate change is to surround yourself with people who care about our world and act together. So if you haven't already joined us, I hope you will. And this photo represents what I love about Haliburton, the clarity of the water and natural shorelines. And this is what we're trying very hard to protect. So this concludes the director's report. This is a quote from Jane Goodall. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. So that, as I say, concludes my director's report. The next item on the agenda is the financial report, and I will now call on Margaret Dobrinsky to give that report.
So this is kind of new to me. Can you hear me? I guess okay. I hope I don't make you fall asleep or anything with the report. But we started 2023 with a bank balance of $3,855 and ended the year with a balance of $4,778. So that's an increase of $900. That is a positive, certainly not a deficit. Our income from membership fees in 2023 met our expectations and showed steady improvement compared to the previous year. Individual donations exceeded our projected target due to several generous individuals. The total income of, now we're going to go to total income for 2023 was $2,674. Looking at our expenses in 2023, we spent less than one half of our proposed budget. This was largely due to Zoom fees replacing hall rentals and other related items. We backed off on a number of different projects that we had planned, and so we came up with a surplus in the end. But this year, for sure, we're going to be following up on some of those projects. Our major expense was our annual insurance premium, which was slightly over $1,000. So as I mentioned before, we were left with a balance of $900 more than what we started with. I want to thank Keith Hay for his help in maintaining the books, and I really appreciate that, Keith. And since our monetary transactions are minimal, we have not engaged an auditor. Instead, I'm happy to provide members with any itemized accounting on their request. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Margaret. It's great. One of the biggest, short. One of the items that we didn't spend money on last year was the home and cottage show, and we are going this year. And so that is a fairly expensive item in our budget, but we are going this year. So let's see. So I guess we need a motion to accept the financial report for 2023. Wilma and seconder Karen. Thank you. All in favor? Excellent. I didn't see any hands not shot up, so that's carried. Oh, I'm sorry. I should have asked if there were any questions about the financial report. I apologize. No. Oh, Jackie? I didn't bring the document with me, but basically it ensures if we're having in-person events such as we're having today against anyone falling down the stairs or what have you. I believe we're insured, our board is insured against anything in the newspaper that is defamatory. What else, Terry?
Well, that's basically it.
Yeah.
Except we have records liability. So that if someone sues us, right, they're wrong, that's without. We can get it back. The other thing is that when we're holding public events, often the place where we're holding requires to have $5 million. Where the liability. Example, when somebody's on site. So that's coming down now. However, it's where they require us to continue to.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you. Yes, I guess the financial report has already moved, so. Right, the next item on the agenda is the election of directors. For the election of directors, an election chair is asked by the membership to conduct the elections. Shirley Moore has agreed to act as election chair. Could I have an Environment Haliburton member make the following motion that Shirley Moore be election chair for the 2024 annual general meeting election of directors? Could I have a motion, please? Mary Beth, thank you. And a seconder? Okay, thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Nope, carried, thank you. So Shirley, I would like to invite you to come up and conduct the election.
Okay, so I need all of you to scream at me because I know because I'm not going to hear when somebody moves something or seconds it, and I need you to tell me in a loud way because I'm told by Susan I have to put your name on this piece of paper. So because I'm a deaf old lady, I need screaming. All right, so according to our comprehensive bylaw number 1, directors are elected at the annual general meeting by members. The bylaw stipulates that we should have a minimum of 7 directors, but we can have up to 21 directors. The usual term for the position of director is 2 years. We try to have an approximately even number of directors in either the first year or the second year of their term, so that there is continuity from year to year. Directors must be current members of Environment Haliburton. So our current directors are Margaret Dupensky, Susan Hay, and Terry Moore, who have completed 2 terms. And Margaret and Terry have agreed to serve 1 year, another 1-year term. Tammy Kipper has completed a 1-year term and has agreed to serve for another 1-year term. And Christine Legge and Wilma Thompson have completed one-year terms and have both agreed to serve another two-year term. And new director, Keith Hay, will serve a two-year term, and new director, Greta Jensen, will serve a one-year term. Ryan Sisson has completed a one-year term and will be resigning from the board due to familial obligations. So we try to have approximately one half of the directors starting a two-year term each year. So the board is recommending that this slate to the membership. Susan, Keith, Christine, and Wilma will serve two-year terms. Tammy, Terry, Margaret, and Greta will serve one-year terms. May I have an EH member move to accept this slate of nominees for the position of director?
I'll be happy to move that, Shirley, Marty, too.
Thank you. And I need a second. Susan Sisson. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask if there are any objections to this motion. Hearing none, this motion carries. So, are there any other nominations for the position of director? I'm told I have to say this 3 times. That's number 1. I'm not usually a repetitive woman, but however. Are there any other nominations for this position of director? And the 3rd time, are there any other nominations for the position of director? Okay. Because the general bylaw allows for up to 21 directors, these nominees are all acclaimed as directors of EH. Welcome to the board, Keith and Greta. And thank you. Before we turn it back, I'd like to give my heartfelt, passionate thank you to all of you who are serving. Thank you.
Thanks. That's great. Great part of the election, the meeting to have over with. And I'm very, very pleased to have Greta and Keith join our board. And I would also like to say a heartfelt thanks to Ryan for his help over the past 1.5 years, and for helping out with the technical aspects of this meeting, and for getting me out of trouble when I can't navigate MailChimp, that sort of thing. Ryan's been tremendously helpful in those instances. So, just have to advance the slide. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about our 2 new members of the board. The first of these is my husband, Keith, who has been attending our board meetings and capably doing the bookkeeping for the past couple of years. Keith is a retired family doctor, a retired medical advisor with the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, and the current chief of staff of the HHS. He is the father of our 2 adult children and the grandfather of 2 boys. And he is passionate about the environment and is very knowledgeable about climate change and extremely supportive in everything I do for environmental health, or I wouldn't be here. Greta Jensen, the second person, has had a long time interest in learning how to live lightly on the planet. She believes that paying attention matters. Learning, questioning, enhancing our own understanding is important, but even more important is finding ways to engage with and motivate others. Bretta moved to Haliburton County in 2023, choosing to live in shared housing at Oakview Co-Living, where multiple people live in a single shared dwelling. Her previous employment was in IT. She worked for a small software company, and her role was a business analyst and technical training. She is currently a visual artist and will be teaching a course at the Haliburton College of Art and Design this summer. And, okay. Something's- but, so I would like to thank all of the Environment Haliburton board members for their incredible support over the past year and a half, and you all know how you have contributed. I appreciate it greatly. You've all offered your skills, your knowledge, your wisdom, and I think for a small group of people, we've done a pretty good job. Okay, so I will now ask for a motion to adjourn. Margaret, thank you. And apparently we don't need a seconder for that motion. So that is it. And we can go back to the tea and cookies.